Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today's advisor webinar. Today's topic is the Culture Code, which is based on a New York Times best-selling book by Daniel Coyle. Hope that the information today can be seen more as a advisor professional personal development opportunity compared to some of our other webinars we've done so far this year, which have been very focused on some Delta Upsilon specific areas, such as meta merit or membership outcomes, compared to this, which is more of a professional personal development topic. So I'm excited to spend some time with you all today discussing this topic. And with that, we will go ahead and get started in the webinar. So as I mentioned, well, I'm having trouble advancing my slide. There we go. As I mentioned, this webinar is based on Daniel Coyle's book, The Culture Code, The Secrets of Highly Successful Groups. In this book, he really describes 3 different skills that it takes to create, develop, and strengthen the culture of an organization. So thinking about it through the lens of Delta Upsilon, this webinar, we really hope to focus on how advisors can assist chapters and colonies with his 3 concepts, which are building safety, sharing vulnerability, and establishing purpose, in order to grow, to sustain that positive culture for our undergraduate members. I will say we used this book this past summer with our chapter development staff as part of our summer staff training, and found the concepts in it to be very relevant, but also easily digestible, easy to grasp and to identify different ways that you could utilize different parts of it. So that being said, I promise you all I'm not getting a kickback or anything like that from Daniel Coyle for promoting his book, but I will tell you it is it's an easy read, it's a pretty quick read, and if you enjoy books that have a lot of stories and examples in them, this will be a great one for you to pick up perhaps over the holidays and dive into it a little bit. All right. So in this book, and I apologize for the blank screen here, you'll get it in a second. One of the things he looked at is, why do certain groups add up to be greater than the sum of their parts, while others add up to be less? So in his different stories, one of the ones that Daniel dove into was focused on a designer and engineer named Peter Skillman. And Peter assembled a series of 4-person groups at places like Stanford and the University of California, the University of Tokyo, and many other environments outside of universities as well. And what he did with these different 4-person groups was he challenged them to build the tallest possible structure using the following 4 items: 20 pieces of uncooked spaghetti, 1 yard of transparent tape, 1 yard of string, and 1 standard size marshmallow. I could only find a picture of 3 marshmallows, so go with it for this setting. And some of you may have heard of this type of activity before. So with these items, the groups of 4 people, they had one rule: the marshmallow had to end up on top. But their challenge, like I said, was to build the tallest possible structure that they could using only those 4 elements. So in his projects and his studies here with all different types of people, is that he found this had less to do with the task than it did to do with the actual participants. So for example, some teams consisted of business school students, while other teams consisted of kindergartners, so 5-year-olds. The interesting thing with the business students is he talked about how they got right to work on this activity. They were talking, they were thinking strategically, they would look at all the materials laid out in front of them, They would toss ideas back and forth. They'd ask each other good questions. They would generate several different options, talk about it, and then settle on what it is that they thought would be the most promising thing. So in a typical, I think, business school student process, they were professional, they were rational, they were intelligent with their process. On the other hand, the groups of kindergartners, as you might expect, they didn't strategize, they didn't analyze, they didn't share, any of their thoughts. They didn't ask questions, they didn't sort through their different ideas, they didn't really even talk at all. They just kind of stood real close to each other, started grabbing materials and building. Following no strategy, no plan, anything like that, just like you would expect a group of 5-year-olds to do. But if you had to bet which of the teams would win this activity of building the highest structure, tallest structure, logic would tell you that it would be the business school students, right? Because they have the intelligence, the skills, the experiences to really do a superior job. But we would all be wrong. In dozens and dozens of trials that Peter Skillman did, the kindergartners built the highest structures. The kindergartners averaged 26 inches tall, while the business school students' structures averaged less than 10 inches tall. And so what Peter Skillman synthesized from all of this was that this happens because our instincts lead us to focus on the wrong details. We focus on what we can see, we focus on our individual skills, but it's the individual skills aren't what matters. What matters in this situation in particular is that interaction. So business school students in this experiment, they were engaged in status management, trying to figure out where do they fit into the larger picture there. So who is in charge? Can I criticize somebody else's idea? What are the rules? Their interactions appear to be smooth, but their underlying behavior is filled with inefficiency, hesitation, and subtle competition. Whereas the kindergartners, they go all in. They look disorganized, but when you step back and analyze it, their behavior is actually very efficient and effective. They're not competing for status with each other. They are standing there shoulder to shoulder, working energetically together. They move quickly. If they spot a problem, they might grab something else or jump in. They experiment with stuff. They take risks. They're not overthinking things. They're just making those outcomes happen. So in this setting, the kindergartners succeeded not because they were smarter, but because they actually worked together in a smarter way. They were tapping into this idea of a simple and powerful method in which a group of ordinary people, ordinary kindergartners, can create a performance far beyond the sum of their parts. And interestingly enough, Daniel Coyle, the author, when he was talking about this experiment by Peter Skillman, said that the results were the same, whether it was groups of business school students or lawyers or groups of CEOs. In the average of every situation, the kindergartner structures always average to be higher than the lawyers, the CEOs, and the other business students. So really interesting example here that I think is going to lead us into what Daniel Coyle gets into with his 3 skills of the culture code. So like I briefly mentioned, his 3 skills. First one is build safety. So this explores how signals of connection generate bonds of belonging and identity. And we're going to dig into each of these a little bit in much more detail. The second one is share vulnerability. So this really explains how habits of mutual risk drive cooperation. And then the third one, establish purpose, that tells how narratives can create shared goals and values. So the three skills, they really work together from the bottom up, which is a flip for what might be some of our conventional thinking. Really what he's saying and what he's discovered here is that you first have to build that group connection, and you have to channel it into action before you can really accomplish things that are based on a purpose. So for the purpose of today's webinar, thinking through those three skills, how can advisors specifically assist and engage and encourage chapters to develop these skills and really integrate them into the culture of the organization? So let's first jump into building safety. When you ask people inside highly successful groups to describe their relationship with one another, Daniel Coyle in his research found that they all tend to choose the same word, family. And again, this is in highly successful groups. They're describing their relationship with each other as family. These groups exhibit a distinct pattern of interaction, not in the big things, but in the little moments of social connection. So these groups will be in close physical proximity together. They profuse significant amounts of eye contact, physical touch like handshakes or fist bumps or even hugs. They have lots of short, energetic exchanges. High levels of mixing, so like everyone talks to everyone, not just staying in a clique here or a little side group here. They have few interruptions. They ask lots of questions and really exhibit active listening. They use humor and laughter to build that safety in the group, and they exhibit small attentive courtesies that he calls them. So things like saying thank you or opening doors that you might not really think about, but actually go a long way in building that feeling of safety within a group. So those cues, they're all cues for belonging. And as we were reading this book this past summer, how great it was that one of the first things he talks about here is belonging, because it brought us right back to the membership outcomes assessment and all the data that we have on the measures of brotherhood, and how belonging is really the top measure in terms of how our undergraduate members feel most connected to a chapter and get the most out of their experience, really coming back to that idea of belonging. So if you know from that data that your chapter is one of the ones that struggles with that sense of belonging, this whole skill here around building safety could really help with that overarching belonging feeling. Daniel Coyle in the book, he talks about how belonging cues possess three basic qualities. So one is energy. The members of that group, they invest in the exchange that's occurring. They're putting all their energy into it. The second cue for belonging is individualization. So they treat the person as unique and as valued. And then the third cue for belonging is that there is a future orientation, meaning that they're signaling to the people in that group that the relationship will continue. It's not a one-time sort of transactional interaction. This relationship is going to continue. You are part of this group now. You will remain a part of this group. And all of those cues add up to the message that you are safe here. So like I mentioned, Daniel Coyle uses a lot of different stories throughout the book. And one of the ones in the section about building safety, he tells a story about Greg Popovich. So if you are a basketball fan, you probably already know Greg Popovich, longtime head coach of the San Antonio Spurs. And he can be described in a lot of ways as old school, hardcore, unapologetic, authoritarian type of coach. His disposition has been compared to a bulldog, and some people say he possesses a temper that could be described as volcanic. So might not be the type of person that immediately comes to mind about building safety in a group. But that brings us to this riddle that Daniel proposed of how does a cranky, demanding coach create one of the most cohesive teams in all of sports and over such a long period of time? A common answer would be, well, the Spurs they're smart. You know, they're smart about drafting players. They're smart about developing unselfish, hardworking, team-oriented individuals. The Spurs scouting template even includes a checkbox that's labeled not a Spur. So if they're looking at a future player and they see sort of how he's interacting with others and they don't think it'll represent the Spurs, they will check that box off. But it's more than that. Like, the Spurs aren't just selecting unselfish players or forcing them to play that way. Something else is going on there. And in this situation, Daniel Coyle says, if you watch Popovich in practice, he moves around the gym, he talks to players, he touches them on the shoulder, he chats with them in several languages because they have players from different countries on the team. He laughs with them, his eyes are bright, knowing, active, and he approaches every relationship with his players that way. He fills their cup, he makes them feel connected. One of his fellow coaches even said, you know, a lot of coaches can yell or be nice, but what Pop does is different. He delivers you things over and over. He'll tell you the truth with no BS, and then he'll love you to death. And so in this example of building safety, Popovich really finds that intersection between truth and love with his players, which then trickles down into how the players and ultimately how the team is able to work together and to build that sense of safety among each other. So with this skill of building safety, wanting to offer a couple of ideas from the book that could translate into ideas for advisors. The first one being to over-communicate your listening. So think about a time where you sat there and you were listening to one of our undergraduate members. What can you do in that situation to build safety? Think about your posture. Think about your expression. Head tilted forward, eyes unblinking, leaning in, paying attention with intent, you know, avoiding interruption, really being blatant with it, that I am here, I am listening to your concern. That's going to establish that element of safety. This is a safe place. You are listening to me and you are here to help me, to that undergraduate. The second one is spotlight your fallibility early on, especially if you're a leader. And in this case with our advisors, you are looked at as a leader by our undergraduate men. That is what an advisor is there to do. They're going to look up to you. So when he says spotlight your fallibility early on, what he means in this situation is radiating humility. So sharing your own personal worries and concerns, what you've seen in the chapter, what you experienced maybe when you were an graduate in whatever role it was, showing that human side of yourself that we all have those fears and worries and concerns, but we know that our undergraduate men are often scared to show them themselves. You know, they're often scared to let the guard down, and for fear of, you know, what do you mean you think about that and you worry about that? Like, what's wrong with you? If you as an advisor can show that in yourself, our undergraduates are going to sense that level of safety and that this is a safe environment in the chapter. The next one, overdue thank yous. I think this is one of those ones when you read the book, you're like, well, of course that makes sense, right? Because the more you say thank you to somebody and show your appreciation, the more that they're going to feel like this is a place that they belong to. Going back to Coach Popovich, one of his phrases that he says over and over to his players is, thank you for allowing me to coach you. And I think about the inverse of that for our advisors. Imagine saying to a chapter president or VP finance, hey, thank you for allowing me to advise you. Probably not something they hear often, especially from somebody older than them and in a position of authority like our advisors are. The next one here, make sure everyone has a voice. So this can be challenging in some of our chapters that are well over 100 members. And so it involves getting creative at times, but in the book, he gives examples of successful groups that follow rules like no meeting can end without everyone sharing something. Well, that might be difficult in a chapter meeting, but certainly doable in an exec board meeting or in a committee meeting, or when you're meeting with associate members for the first time or the fifth time before initiation or something like that. Also finding ways just to regularly hold reviews of projects or events, things like that, where members can offer their 2 cents on how it went. But the key here is that leaders and advisors must really seek out those connections and work diligently to make sure that voices are heard. Next one here, avoid giving the sandwich feedback. And this is something probably familiar with and have heard before, this idea that when you're going to give someone feedback, you have to sandwich positive, then the negative, and then the positive. But while it might make sense in practice, it can often lead to confusion, as it will lead people to either focus entirely on the positive things that you shared or entirely on that one negative thing that you shared. And so what he recommends in his book is to instead split those into 2 completely different processes. So if you have to give feedback to a chapter officer, do that at 2 different times. One, when you have to deliver negative feedback, doing that in a dialogue setting where you are there one-on-one, in person ideally, but if not, over Skype or at least on the phone. Ask if that person wants feedback before just jumping into it to establish some level of safety in what you're about to give them. And then on the other side, when you want to give positive feedback, really, I love the way that Daniel described it as giving ultra clear bursts of recognition and praise. And so finding those public opportunities, to praise in front of the group, but also sending a thank you note or sending even an email or a text if it's just a quick thing to say thank you, but making sure that it's very evident what you're saying is a good thing and that you are recognizing them for what they did. And then the last one here, embracing fun. That was a big part of this section of the book on building safety. Thinking about fun, thinking about laughter. Laughter is not just laughter. According to Daniel Coyle, it's the most fundamental sign of safety and connection. It's those moments where you are completely letting your guard down, laughing, having a good time, not at the expense of anyone, just pure, unadulterated fun, and finding those moments to, for some of us, relive our college moments of just, here I am, I'm a brother just like you, or I had a college experience just like you, and I can laugh and relive some of those moments and build that element of safety through enjoyment and fun. All right. So the second section that he talks about, second skill that he talks about, is on sharing vulnerability. So in this one, this skill is really how successful groups translate connection into trusting cooperation. So he spends some time talking about the vulnerability loop. And this is the first time I had heard about this, but I think it is out there in other areas. And I found it to be, an easily digestible piece to remember in your interactions with students. So this vulnerability loop. People tend to think of vulnerability in a touchy-feely way, but that's not what is happening here. This is about sending a really clear signal that you have weaknesses, that you could use help, and if that behavior becomes a model for others, then you can set insecurities aside, get to work, start to trust each other, and help out. So as you can see from this diagram, person A sends a signal of vulnerability. Person B detects that signal. Person B responds by signaling their own vulnerability. Person A detects that signal. So in that, a norm is established, closeness and trust increase. So again, Daniel Coyle, lots of stories in this book. And one of the ones he digs into is an example of pilots on a commercial jet, and one of their engines goes out. So there is a hierarchy with pilots, captain and first officer. But in this example, he talks about how they threw that hierarchy out the window the moment something went wrong on that plane. And one of the first questions was, does anybody have any ideas? What are we going to do here? It wasn't just looking to the oldest, most experienced person, but just saying, does anybody have any ideas? And then also saying, tell me what you want and I'll help you. So they threw that seniority, they threw that authority out the window. They focused on what actually needs to happen here and in order to successfully land that plane that's already down an engine. And in this instance, they were successful in actually landing the plane, so that's good. But it might not have happened that way, if they reverted back to, well, you're older than me or you know more than me, I'm not going to say anything. And it took the older person in that situation to be vulnerable in that moment and ask for ideas. And I think that's really relevant for our advisors, because our advisors are always going to be older than our undergraduate members. And so if you're sitting down and talking to an officer, it's going to be their natural tendency to look at you for the right answer and what you should do, because they're used to, they've just come from high school where their teachers told them what to do and their coaches told them what to do. And this advisor-advisee relationship is really one of the first times that flips a relationship for them, and they can start to see that, sure, you might be older than me, but your role here is to help guide, help advise, and that can really be done when it's the advisor willing to be vulnerable. There's a great sentence in the book that says, normally we think about trust and vulnerability the way we think about standing on solid ground and leaping into the unknown. First we build trust and then we leap. But science is showing that we have it backwards. Vulnerability doesn't come after trust, it precedes it. Leaping into the unknown, when done alongside others, causes the solid group of trust to materialize beneath our feet. I just love the image that paints in your mind about what can happen when we start with that vulnerability and how trust can grow on top of that. So let's talk about some ideas for advisors here on the skill of sharing vulnerability. The first one, make sure the leader is vulnerable first and often. So in the book, they talk about how leaders ask their people 3 questions, and thinking about this through the lens of an advisor. First question, what is one thing that I currently do that you'd like me to continue to do? So imagine asking that to your executive board officers. What is one thing that I currently do as an advisor that you would like me to continue to do? The second question, what is one thing that I don't currently do frequently enough that you think I should do more often? Imagine the vulnerable moment in that for them to see that you are asking for that feedback. And then the third question, what can I do to make you more effective? So what can I do as an advisor to make you as the undergraduate chapter officer more effective? The second idea is to over-communicate expectations. So we always come into things with expectations, and the quickest way to have your expectations not met is to not actually share those expectations with anybody. For anybody that's ever been in a relationship, you probably know that to be true, right? So in this situation, we want to be explicit and persistent about sending very big, very clear signals that establish our expectations, but also model cooperation and align our language and our roles to help maximize those behaviors for our undergraduates. So set those expectations clearly, concisely, and communicate them over and over again. The next one, deliver the negative stuff in person. It's not always easy to follow, but it works because it deals with tension in an upfront and honest way that more so avoids misunderstandings because you're there in person. And it creates a sense of shared clarity and connection because you are confronting that negative stuff in person. But typically, the person you're giving it to isn't just getting up and walking away. You are engaging in that conversation and hopefully reaching an endpoint in that discussion where there is clarity and connection between the two of you. Next one is listen like a trampoline. So good listening is about adding insight and creating moments of mutual discovery. So Daniel Coyle says that the most effective listeners do 4 things. 1, they interact in ways that make the other person feel safe and supported. 2, they take a helping cooperative stance. 3, they occasionally ask questions that gently and constructively challenge old assumptions. And 4, they make occasional suggestions to open up alternative paths. So, like trampolines, effective listeners gain amplitude through repetition. So that bouncing up and down, right, on the trampoline. When we're asking questions, it's rarely stopping at that first response. It's bouncing back up and asking another one, finding different ways to explore an area of tension in order to reveal truths and connections that will ultimately enable cooperation. The next one, embrace the discomfort. So one of the most difficult things about creating habits of vulnerability is that it requires the group and the person to endure discomfort. It's not always easy to get in there and talk about the emotions and the feelings, the sense of inefficiency that might have happened or the disappointment, whatever it might be. But the pain isn't the problem. It's embracing that discomfort is really the path to building a stronger group because we're not just ignoring it. We're not just hoping it disappears. We are jumping in there, we're confronting it, we're being vulnerable about it, and that's going to ultimately lead to a stronger group, a stronger chapter in the end. And finally, the last one with share vulnerability is to make the leader occasionally disappear. And so I think in this case, swap out leader with advisor. In the book, he talks about several leaders of successful groups that have the habit of leaving the group alone at key moments. So like Coach Popovich, he's usually right there in timeouts at a game, talking about with the players, like what they're gonna do next, what's the next plan, what's the next play. But there will be times where he just doesn't show up to the huddle during a timeout. And the players look around, realize, all right, no coach this time. We're going to have to figure it out. And so for advisors, thinking about how you are there to advise and to guide the chapter and the officers, but ultimately it's on their shoulders to decide what to do. And when they realize every once in a while, you're not coming to tell them what to do. They have to take charge. They have to talk amongst themselves. They have to figure out a plan. But that can really only happen if that vulnerability and that safety has first been established. All right, and then jumping into the third skill in the book, which is on establishing purpose. And so in this section, talking about how can a handful of simple, forthright sentences make such a difference in a group behavior. So Daniel Coyle looks at some groups and organizations that use things like their motto, their mission, their credo, what that actually means, that it's more than just a couple of words on a sign or in a book that says what they believe in, that it's deeper than that. So to create a high purpose environment, we have to flood that zone with signals that link the present effort to a meaningful future. This is why we work, or this is why you should put your energy into this. This is what this fraternity is about. So for DU, it's easy on the surface, right? Because our principles, our purpose as an organization are rooted in the fraternity's 4 founding principles. So the promotion of friendship, the development of character, the diffusion of liberal culture, and the advancement of justice. What does that actually mean, though, for a chapter? High purpose environments, they send a handful of steady, ultra clear signals that are aligned with these shared goals, or in our case, these shared principles. So it's less about inspiration than it is about consistency. It's not found like in a big speech at the Leadership Institute every year. I mean, it is, but that's not the key place, right? It's found in those everyday moments in the chapter house, in seeing each other on campus, in a classroom. It's in those moments where people can sense the message of what the fraternity is about. This is why we're here. This is what we're aiming for. So how do we go about and create those high purpose environments? And in the book, Daniel Coyle said it really depends on the type of skills you want your group to perform. That there's high proficiency environments and there's high creativity environments. So high proficiency environments help a group deliver a well-defined, reliable performance, while high creativity environments help a group create something new. So I think about leading for proficiency here in terms of, some of our really good chapters that want to be even better. So these chapters, they have a simple set of rules, right, that stimulates complex, intricate behavior that benefits others, benefits the chapter, benefits the campus, benefits the community. That proficiency, it functions as a lighthouse. So orienting behavior, providing a path towards a goal. Proficiency is focused on, here's our 4 principles, and everything we're doing is helping us get to that goal, following a consistent plan year over year for the events we do, the activities we do, and improving on them, but being proficient in our plan as a chapter. Whereas leading for creativity, it's not about like this one brilliant moment of breakthrough, but it's actually about building a system that can churn through a lot of ideas in order to help a chapter or a group unearth the right choices. So I think about leading for creativity for some of our more struggling chapters or our new colonies and expansions, whereas it's not about routine for them yet because they haven't even gotten to the point that they can establish a routine. For them, it's how can we identify and find a few strong ideas that we can latch onto as a chapter, hit a few small wins, build some confidence, and then those small wins start to become where we build our proficiency and repetition in the future. So ultimately, either side, whether you are wanting to create that highly proficient environment or a highly creative environment in your chapter, ultimately both of those come down to establishing purpose. And how are we promoting and developing and diffusing and advancing our principles? So some ideas around establishing purpose. One, name and rank your priorities. So in order to move towards a target, you must first have a target. So list those priorities. For a chapter, how are they wrestling with some of the choices that define their identity as a chapter? There's a lot of different things that are going on, but what are their top priorities? And how can you as an advisor provide input and guidance on the priorities connected to the purpose of the fraternity? Second one, be 10 times as clear about your priorities as you think you should be. So just like we were talking about, over communicating, same thing here, especially in an environment like an undergraduate chapter that is full of constant turnover. I mean, the whole chapter basically turns over every 4 years, but every year we have new officers, new chair positions, new members. So it's important to be very clear about priorities, over communicate them, and create conversations that encourage members to grapple with some of those big questions, like what are we about and where are we headed? Next one is figuring out where your group aims for proficiency and where it aims for creativity. So proficiency is about doing the task the same way every single time, kind of really delivering that machine-like reliability and applying it across the board where the goal, behaviors of the chapter and outcomes of the chapter are clearly defined. Whereas creativity is about empowering a group to do the hard work of building something that maybe never has existed before or has existed at a pretty low level. So you as an advisor, you need to provide support and fuel and tools, and also sometimes serve as a protective presence that empowers the team to keep doing the work, especially in that creativity lens. The next one is to measure what really matters. So Delta Upsilon providing a couple different ways throughout the year to measure whether it's Men of Merits or the Chapter Excellence Plan or the Membership Outcomes Assessment. But the challenge here is when we want to build a clear sense of purpose for a chapter, acknowledging that their world is cluttered with noise and distractions and endless alternative purposes, right? What they're hearing on campus, what they're hearing from their friends and their peers and their community and things like that. So creating some very simple measures for them that allows them to focus on what really matters most for this group. And that's going to vary. You know, for some, it's going to be finding that community partner that they can go do some ongoing regular service work with and really see the impact that a group of 40 or 50 or 60 guys can have on an agency or an organization in that campus community. And for others, it's going to be different. It's going to be recruitment. It's going to be something around health and safety and prevention, and any of those things are okay, but making sure we're measuring with them what really matters so they can see if they're meeting the goals that they had set. And then finally, when we talk about establishing purpose, another thing that we can do here is use artifacts. So this idea that artifacts create a reminder of our purpose and identity. Artifacts are things that you're seeing. So it might be if you have a chapter house, you know, that you have the 4 founding principles right there, very visible in the kitchen or the dining room, you know, somewhere that those guys are in pretty much every single day, reminding them what they're about. Or it might be, you know, we all love to hear hear the conversations about recruitment shirts, but thinking about how do we put the 4 founding principles on our recruitment shirts, or talk about our purpose and our goals in those aspects. So seeing things, reinforcing those signals over and over again, that this is what really matters. This is what this is all about. So to wrap things up, I think just 3 final thoughts. One, there's not a perfect way to go about establishing and developing a positive culture in a chapter. And that's one of the nice things about the book, is that each of these skills, he provides a number of different stories and examples of how different groups across industries and across the world really are achieving each of those skills in the culture of their organization. So, you know, if there was a perfect way, we would have probably already identified that and said, this is exactly the one single way that a fraternity can exist. But we know that there's different factors. You know, it's campus environments, types of institutions, housed or not housed, public, private, small or large. You might have mostly business majors, you might have mostly engineers, but ultimately the process and the skills in this book and in this concept of the culture code can really be adapted to every type of chapter and group. The second one takeaway would be that, you know, this must involve key stakeholders at every level. Can't be led in a silo. This must involve the undergraduate leaders, the advisors, the campus staff, headquarters staff. Some of those stakeholders might carry more weight at times than others, but it's really a collective effort to change or improve or develop the culture of a chapter. And then finally, the last one, and this is a direct quote from Daniel Coyle in the book, is to regularly ask yourself, what am I doing to trigger learning, to spark collaboration, to build trust, and to drive positive change? Think about yourself first. You know, there's always the example of, well, when you're on an airplane and they talk about if the mask, the oxygen mask come down, what are you supposed to do? You're supposed to put it on yourself first before you put it on the person next to you. And kind of thinking about this in that regard, that we can't ask somebody else to do something that we wouldn't be willing to do first. And especially as an advisor, you know, being able to be willing to be vulnerable, to build that safety before we can get to the part of establishing that purpose and building on that purpose. So I appreciate you all for taking some time today to do this more personal professional development topic, and hope that you found some value in the overview. Definitely recommend checking out the book. Like I said earlier, it's a very easy read, full of lots of good stories and examples. If you have any questions about this, if you have any questions about how we used the book with our staff this summer, I'm happy to fill you in with some more details. Finally, if you are listening to the live version of the webinar right now, today is December 19th, and just a reminder that fraternity headquarters will close tomorrow afternoon, December 20th at 3 p.m. for the holidays, and will reopen on Thursday, January 2nd, just in time for President's Academy, January 3rd through the 6th. So if you need anything over the holidays, email will be monitored, but feel free to reach out today and tomorrow if it's a top priority item. Hope you all have a great holidays, and as always, thank you so much for serving as an advisor to our chapters. How much we greatly appreciate that. Have a great day. Thank you all.